I can read this. There we go.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for all being here. It's really nice to see so many people in the room. I'm really glad to be back with you all for our first World Building Initiative workshop of the spring. Among the robots, our relationship with the non-human. Thanks to everybody who's here in the Piper Center with us. Come on in. And thanks to everybody who's joining us online. If you haven't met before, my name is Matt Bell, the director of the World Building Initiative. Today we'll have two presentations from members of our ASU Humanities community. Afterwards, we'll have time for conversation, for questions, for all of you in the room, and if you are online as well. Before we begin, I just want to thank our partners at ASU, including the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Department of English, the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing, and the Lincoln Center for Applied Ethics, where the World Initiative is housed. Thanks especially this month to Liz Grumbach, who did so much of the work to put this together and is moderating online for those of you. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's world builders, embarrassing one of which is me. We tried to find like an actual robot scientist who talks about robots, but they are being held down by their overlords and cannot be here with us. So we're just going to humanities this. Tara Narsborough is a writer, designer, teacher, and dog aficionado from San Jose, California. You got very now for it. Prior to pursuing creative writing, she spent a decade designing human-machine interfaces, including chatbots, Alexa skills, and interactive voice response systems, primarily in the health technology space. Special interests in human-machine communications include advancement of health equity, digital motivation, and digitally mediated shame reduction. Currently, they teach and write as a third-year MFA candidate at ASU, and are work writing a memoir about their time in women's mixed martial arts. Usually at the beginning of this, I say we're going to have two experts speak, because I was one of the people speaking. I didn't want to say expert. Actually, an expert. I am not. Really briefly for symmetry, I'm the author of the novel Appleseed, The Craft That Needs to Be Done, and I teach creative writing here at ASU. Thank you very much. I love the caption that says, "I'm actually an expert." That's not.
Oh my gosh, Matt Bell, you are so much more than symmetry. Okay, yes, as stated, my name is Tara, and I'm so happy to be here talking about human-robot relationships, and talking to one of my favorite humans, Matt Bell. So, and thank you so much to ASU Worldbuilding for having me. I would like to start with a little bit of context on my relationship with human-robot relationships, because thanks for laughing at that one. It didn't test well. But I worked in a very, very specific subset of AI, so I kind of wanted to frame that up before I get into it. This is not my next slide. Oh, okay, here we go. So, there's always something in the technology port over, but here we have it. So basically, for about a decade, my job was designing conversational interfaces within the healthcare system. And a conversational interface, as many of you may know, is just something that enables you to talk to a machine. So that might be something like a chatbot, it could be something like an Alexa, a digital assistant in your car, or an IVR system, also known as a robocall. And in my job, these could be one-off interactions, like something that's trying to help you get a colonoscopy scheduled, or it could be something that lasts for weeks or months, like helping you stay connected to your healthcare team after hospitalization, like a stroke or a heart attack, or something that kind of helps you adjust to life with a new diagnosis, like diabetes or overactive bladder or something like that. So let's see, watch me as I live try and piece together. Okay, here, now this one's the next one. So it could look something like this. They might be a nice little chatbot checking in on your prescriptions, teaching you how the bladder works. It could be something like an Alexa skill, which is just Alexa's equivalent of an app, just like something special that it does in addition to its general stuff. Or over the phone. So, don't hate me, mine were good robocalls, but a lot of them were these sort of like choose your own adventure voice-to-voice robocalls, which kind of like responded to a human's voice, and then the system that I would design would tell it what to do next based on input. So to make good conversational interfaces, one of the things that I had to do was study how to build rapport and gain trust, and also minimize conversational errors. It's hard to mimic human conversation, and so you kind of have to figure out what are the best ways that we can make them usable. And then let's go back here. I also had to figure out how humans engage and form relationships with robotic entities. This is especially pertinent for any kind of type of conversation that is sensitive, conversations that may span more time, or conversations where you're trying to achieve something that may be a little bit more challenging. So this was sort of the start of my interest in human-robot relationships, and this is my domain of expertise, but I definitely paid attention with great interest to the wider conversations about AI that we're having right now, as well as about human-machine relationships generally. There's a ton of ethical debates at play, and I also think that studying our relationships with the non-human can go on to teach us a lot about what it means to be human, which is, as a writer and human, is something that I'm also interested in. So, okay, so now I will do just a quick little primer, allotted 20 minutes of some facets of human-machine relationships. So I want to start by this concept that I think a lot of us are aware of, skeuomorphism. It's basically something that helps us understand how to use something that is new or foreign. It's hearkening to a real-world counterpart and helping us figure out something. It was really common in the early days of computers. You know, what do you do with this thing that you no longer need? You put it in the trash. What do you do with this thing that you want to save? Okay, you put it in a folder. So for speaking and moving robots, that skeuomorph is actually a person. That's kind of like the closest parallel that you're thinking of when you think of these type of interactions. So basically, in my world of conversational agents, I needed to program my bots to adhere to human conversational norms in order to teach them how to use those robots effectively. So this included thinking about turn-taking cues, politeness in conversation, the way that people recover after misunderstandings, the way that people, or at least the people most of us like to talk to, will remember things that you told them previously. So, by the way, it is very easy to trigger a social reaction to a non-human entity. Our brains are just so deeply social that we will pull social cues from everything around us, even when there is only a little shred of human to them. This is how we get, you know, the famous Jesus toast, and you know, just these charming googly eyes everywhere. This is a fun fact called pareidolia, to see something familiar in the random, and it's usually faces, and it comes from our brain's expertise. We have a lot of space in the visual cortex that's devoted to face recognition because it's part of our big job as human. You know, to exist as human in the world, we kind of got to be able to differentiate some of these faces out here more than like a pile of rocks, right? And so that kind of expert cortex that's learned so much about perceiving human faces is kind of going on to, you might say, misfire, but is this really a misfire to see faces and all these dreadful things? Yeah, also a fun fact about the visual expert areas, bird watchers can have bigger bird areas in this expert visual recognition cortex. But it's more than simply saying like, oh, look, a face, how fun, let's move on with my day. These types of tiny little things will go on to affect and trigger prosocial behavior, and kind of like the behavior that we would usually treat a human with. So one example that I always go back to is they did this experiment in grocery store checkout lines where you know how they have those little donation things. All they did was put, so low quality image, I'm sorry, but this is from the study. So they put 2 googly eyes on top of the donation bins, and it led to a 50% increase in charitable donations. So it wasn't just that humans were seeing this space, probably, you know, noticing it more, but it was triggering this kind of more pro-social, okay, I'm gonna be a good human, I'm going to donate to this cause type of behavior. So as wired as we are to be social, we really apply the same attitudes to machines. And there's a whole host of examples of this. Increasingly, they study this in a lot of journals on human-machine relationships. One big thing is politeness. It's very common for people to kind of say please and thank you and be socially gracious to machines, even though they don't have feelings. We will help them usually if they seem to be struggling. Also similar to how we experience secondhand distress if we witness someone being verbally abused or bullied, we experience distress when we hear people verbally abusing a machine. And we also have this really interesting desire to avoid hurting their feelings, which, so this other experiment, they had a group of users, research participants, do this little task on a computer. And they programmed the computer to mess it up a couple times, to make it hard to get from the beginning to the end. And so then they split people into two groups. And for one of the groups, they were like, okay, how did this computer do at administering your task? And for the other group, they had them go to a different computer and then fill out the survey. And people responded so much more positively when they had to take the survey on the same computer that it gave them. Almost like they didn't want to hurt its feelings. So these types of things are fascinating. And I think they kind of move beyond just like our habitual behavior and into something where we really integrate them into our social system. So in my world, basically making a robot sound human-like, to recap, is enabling two main things. First, it's helping people understand how to use those systems because they apply rules that they already know about how to be human conversing, which most days I know how to do, but don't catch me on a bad day. And then it also helps people form emotional attachments that I needed in healthcare sometimes to encourage particular types of behaviors, to get people to text about their bladders every day for 12 weeks is going to require a social type of relationship. So this kind of porosity in human brains as it applies to robots comes with many an opportunity and many a liability. I could go for a long time about this, but I'll stick to just a couple kind of telling examples. So one thing is that even though we apply a lot of social behavior to non-human beings, including robots, we see them as less judgmental as humans, which makes sense. We're like, okay, yeah, of course they're going to judge me less. They don't have an actual brain. And in healthcare, this opened up a lot of space to talk about things related to shame and stigma in a way that's inarguably more efficient than standard healthcare providers talking about these topics. So one was we made a diabetes bot that would follow up with people who had just been diagnosed with diabetes. And as you may know, when you get diagnosed with a chronic condition, there's a lot of mental health comorbidities that come with it. And it's not something that's often screened for in the healthcare system, and it's not something that people are gonna volunteer easily to their healthcare providers. So sort of by having a relational bot that normalized depression along with diabetes, and then proactively screened for it, we caught a lot of people that said they had never discussed their depression with a healthcare provider, including a lot of men who will statistically not disclose depression as frequently. So there's a lot of kind of applicability there. There's also the potential to model comfortable conversation. So if I'm embarrassed about something and I hear someone talking about it comfortably, I become less ashamed of talking about and thinking about that topic for myself. So with overactive bladder, which I know I do talk about a lot, sorry, it's a condition that's really stigmatized. Most people will wait an average of 7 years before they tell any healthcare professional about it. But by having kind of a friendly bot persona that people could connect to and relate to and like, and then to have this digital persona modeling comfort with these topics about leaking pee and having to run to the bathroom, it can really go on to model more comfort for the people talking to the system, and then open up the conversation for them to talk more to their communities about these types of issues and kind of close some of those disparities in health. And on that note, some of the robotic entities can also increase access. I mean, there's frankly, like for overactive bladder, there's just not enough pelvic floor physical therapists. So in digitizing it, you can really expand access. And then there's also been a lot of research that shows that chatbot education in the health sphere is really good for reaching people who might not have as high degree of health literacy or ability to kind of like understand and act on health information. Yeah, I know you all know this Duolingo owl. I know this is kind of a controversial figure, but it represents.
Literally last.
Some people see this as more of a hostile agent, but basically, you know, kind of having these types of digital coaching experiences can also expand access, make something free easier than, you know, making your friend teach you another language. We can get psychological rewards from a digital entity being like, hey, Tara, good job. You know, internally, I'm like, oh, thank you. Yeah, there's this a whole chart. Again, there's come up to me. We can trade journal articles, but there's a whole bunch of research on, you know, things like self-disclosure, why we do it, why we avoid it, implications for human-robot interactions. It's a lot about the judgment, but then it's also about being able to react well to a disclosure of stigmatized information. So a lot of the reasons why sometimes we avoid saying something that causes us shame is we don't know what the other person is going to say. But as someone who's an expert in health communication and trying to reduce stigma can kind of programatize a reaction to things like that, that could be a possible way to move the needle. But let's not get too positive. There's definitely a flip side. There's always a flip side. Because of this porosity with our social robots, problematic interactions with social robots can also have real world effects. I know we've probably seen a lot of this about, you know, AI on the news in terms of kind of like proclivity for racism and things like that. This is an example from closer to my field where most digital assistants are coded as female. Obviously, they have no gender, but sometimes they identify as female, and the vast majority of people will perceive them or code them as female. And this title comes from what Siri said, if you call her a bitch. And this report, it's a really fascinating and kind of dark report. I read it a few years ago. There's a whole chart of what the most common digital assistants will say in response to verbal sexual harassment. And it's not cute. Usually they're responding with kind of like a flirtatious behavior, a kind of like, you know, subservient type of behavior. It's a very like kind of like, oh, you old so-and-so type of reaction. Yes. I don't get this whole gender thing. Like, truer words never spoken. Like my diary. Anyway, but back to this. So, you know, where Siri cannot be hurt, but we as people can be. Oh, this is making me work for this one. Oh, because I activated Siri. This is so funny. Okay, well, let's see if I can fix this. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna say S. That'll be our code. Okay. So yeah, the more that we're teaching our culture to equate women-coded people with assistants, the more people that society codes as women are going to be seen as assistant-like and penalized for not being that way. So we're kind of like deepening these channels when we design these systems in the image of something that is like skewmorph to real life. And basically, I'm sure you'll be very surprised to hear that there was not a lot of female input in the creation of these early digital assistants. But yeah, they've basically been programatized to take out assertiveness, defensiveness, and anger, and to really have them be like kind, playful, helpful. And a lot of them will point to research that says, oh, well, people prefer a female voice for these assistants. And it's like, yeah, we are more comfortable hearing a female voice give us assistance, but we're also more comfortable hearing a male voice tell us an authoritative statement, like give us map directions. So yeah, that may be our preference, but it's the preference of a sexist world. And in creating these sort of like digital proxies, we only ingrain those things. gotta work for this one too. So yeah, I mean, basically, AI is gonna work best for the people who make it. I think we know at this point who makes AI. And, you know, even if you could argue this is maybe unintentional harm, like these things happen and they have real world effects. They didn't change those like responses to sexual harassment for, I think, about 6 or 7 years, until like there was mass public pressure to do so. Yeah, so when I think about that porosity that we have towards social robots, I think a lot about what this might do to people who are not represented by or prioritized by the people who are making this technology. So one last 0.5 thing that I think is interesting to talk about in human-machine relationships is this concept of robomorphism. So I think a lot of us familiar with anthropomorphism, so applying human traits to something non-human. Robomorphism is when we attribute robot traits to something that is not a robot. So an example of this might be to say, oh, I'm just not wired that way, or oh, we've been programmed to believe X, Y, Z. I need to recharge my batteries, something like that. I think it's really interesting that robots have become so ubiquitous that they've started to influence our understanding of our own selves, particularly when it comes to trying to express some type of complex emotion. So just kind of like another example of that sort of feedback loop. And I think as most of us are writers, we do understand how the words that we use to describe our reality will very often affect it. So yeah, as a mostly final note, I would say, like, if I had to kind of recap a theory of all of this, robots tap very deeply into our innate human social wiring, especially with the more human-like robots. So ones that may have embodied forms, ones that may remind us more of human on that kind of like googly eyes to like, more embodied robot scale. They affect us psychologically and inform how we treat other people. It can be an opportunity space and it can be a potential for harm. So yeah, and then robots and AI as a whole, of course, are always going to benefit. They're going to reflect the people who create it, benefiting those whose needs are understood and prioritized, and we're more likely to be harmed when they're not. So yeah, feel free to talk to me about bots anytime. And just as like, I always.
It is time. Please talk about it.
Okay, Matt's giving me the go to talk about my favorite little pet robot. Everyone's got a story about those Starship robots everywhere on campus, and so of course I went to Reddit, the final source of truth. And just collecting the wide degree of opinions about these things, I think we're like so representative of a lot of things that happen in this field as a whole. Like you see, at University of Houston, those are our robots. They become socially integrated as a part of the society. People are kind of making jokes about the overlords. Some people are like, no way, I'll steal the package. I probably destroy the robot. But the vast majority of them are just like, I want to pet it. Reminds me of a dog. They're so cute. Look at their little flags. Oh my gosh. Okay, I can't wait to read the comments. But yeah, it's fascinating to see kind of like the myriad of ways that people respond to something that is like not even that human at all. Maybe more in its motions. But yeah, kind of like tapping into that social wiring and triggering a whole bunch of different behaviors. So everyone's got a Starship story. With that, I will pass it over to the acclaimed Matt Bell.
That was too good. Now I don't want to go at all. I'll also say, like, I probably want to talk about the Starship robots. I think about them a lot too. I'm a little obsessed with them. And I was saying this to Tyler before we started. When they first came out, I think they now prompt if they get stuck at like a street light where they need the button pressed. But I found like 8 of them in a row. And I was like waiting for a light that would never change. I pressed the button. I wasn't even going that way. I pressed the button and then I walked them. Like no reason whatsoever. And then went back to where I was going. And I was like, why? Why did I do that? And I felt very, kind of unnerved by my ability to serve the robots with no prompting whatsoever, which is pretty great. I'm going to talk a little bit just from like a sci-fi angle on this as well, starting from Isaac Asimov. I love it everybody just cheers. It's great. You know, we're with people. But Isaac Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics, which obviously many of us are familiar with already, and as either sci-fi readers or people thinking about robotics, have been incredibly influential. I was looking for covers of the book where they first appeared, and these were the 3 oldest ones I could find. I love there's even the different ideas of what robots might look like across them. And you can kind of see different influences on it as well. For those of us who have not heard them, haven't heard them in a while, Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics existed in his stories before this. But first presented in the story Runabout from iRobot. This is the movie version of the robots in iRobot with Will Smith, which is not really an adaptation of iRobot. That's a whole other thing. Anyway, these 3 laws, as Asimov formulated them most famously. Number 1. A robot may not injure a human being or, through an action, allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except for such orders which conflict with the first law, and a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. I remember reading these for the first time when I was like a teenager and just being pretty in awe of the idea of them. I thought they were really interesting. I thought the implications of them were a lot of fun. I'm thinking of them a little bit as a, both like, could we design robots in this way? Do we design robots in this way? But also as a novelist, like what's interesting about these? Where do the problems come from once you put these in place? And obviously also looking for plots, we're looking for problems. So really small selection of like possibilities. Robots would not be able to use for warfare, at least against human beings. Hopefully do not injure a human being, as would violate the first law, unless, of course, you redefine human beings to only be persons on your side, right? And of course, we use that kind of language already to get human beings to fight each other. So like, it's not really that hard to imagine us using it to use robots that way. Robots could not be used to commit murder or other violent crimes, right? Again, they weren't harming, unless you don't quite tell the robot what it's up to, right? Let's go harvest some poison, robot. Let's go put that in a, you don't tell the robot what they're up to. Famously, the stories are divided up among lots of robots. The crimes committed by like 8 robots that don't understand what they're up to. You can certainly get around these things. And as soon as humans make a law, we start being like, but do I have to follow it? Like there's always that sort of secondary step. And laws are dependent on the robot knowing it's a robot. So if you program the robot to believe it's a human being, you can get around in that way. It responds in different ways. And then what does harm mean in the context of the first law? What if not allowing a human being to come to harm includes things like air pollution, global warming, fatty foods? I mean, I could use a robot that followed me around and smack hamburgers out of my hands, but we would not enjoy it. There's all these sort of definitional sort of things. And then these ideas about their own protection, protecting their own existence, get into interesting places as well. One of the things I think is also interesting that I've seen less in stories is the second one where they have to follow orders given by human beings. And like presumably one way for robots to be free then would be to stay away from human beings. Like, right? Like they can do whatever they want as long as there's not a human around to tell them. There's lots of interesting sort of ways around these. And I think one exercise that you could assign yourself is really just to try to find a novel exception to these that no one's done before, which is fun. When I actually first read these in this book, Robots and Empire by Asimov, which is a late book where he'd been thinking of this for a long time. And in that book, this 0th law is invented by the robots. 2 robots come up with this law on their own, sort of intuiting it, that a robot may not injure humanity or through an action allow humanity to come to harm, which sort of expands that first law into a sort of good of the one versus the good of the many kind of question. That I think is really interesting as well, a sort of a really different thing to ask an individual robot or an individual person to think about. In Robots and Empire, these 2 robots are Daniel and R. Giscard. I kind of love that Asimov put R in front of the name of every robot, so you always know. It's like, hi, my name's R. Matt. I'm a robot. Really easy that way to tell them too. They foil a plot to make Earth uninhabitable by this plot to like ramp up the nuclear the normal nuclear sort of disintegration or decay. I put it in the slide. Decay of the Earth's crust. And to stop this, one of the robots injures a human being, injures a couple of human beings, and causes themselves to have kind of brain malfunction to save humanity. But in the process, they also actually go through with the plot. They change it so it happens slowly instead of quickly. believing that the best thing for humanity is to leave Earth and go into space, that the destiny of humanity is in space. So the robots are the ones that decide that humanity leaves Earth in Asimov's books, which I think is really interesting. I'll just say, like, on a personal note, this really stuck with me. I probably first read this when I was like 12, and I think that question really stuck with me. And the end of my novel, Appleseed, has a human being making a kind of similar choice. Like, and I think in mine, it becomes like, what's good for humanity, or what's good for like the planet, or what's good for life on Earth. And it's sort of like a different sort of thing, but trying to do a similar kind of thing that I thought was really interesting. So I think, even as Asimov was laying these out, he's finding all the exceptions, or finding new ways to sort of expand them in interesting ways. Well, I think moral codes generally make for really good plots. As we're writers, like if you have a character who won't violate a moral code, that means you can put them in situations where they should probably violate the moral code, and you have a lot of fun. Famously, Batman has his like, I don't kill people kind of moral code. Superman has the same moral code, and yet they fight all the time. Don't worry about that. But they all work to sort of set these parameters that create logistical, philosophical questions, right for exploring story. Many, many, many stories riffing off these. I think as a fiction writer, you're always trying to put your characters in places where there's no obvious right choice. If there's an obvious thing to do, then there's no drama. They just should just do that. So you have to put people in a place where you do that. As I was researching for this, I was like, I wonder if anyone made a robot Batman. Has there been a robot Batman?
Yes.
And of course, there has been many robot Batmans. Like, one robot Batman is this robot Failsafe that was there to kill Batman if Batman kills. And I'm like, that's nice, like, there's like a moral code down the, so robot Batman can only kill one person, and it's Batman, and only if Batman kills him. A real nice, like, second order kind of problem that I like quite a bit. So we can look at these sort of thought problems that we can pose with these moral codes. Asimov, of course, was often asked, should we actually design robots to use these codes? He said yes. I love this quote of his. He said, I have my answer ready whenever someone asks me if I think that my 3 laws of robotics will actually be used to govern the behavior of robots once they become versatile and flexible enough to be able to choose among different courses of behavior. My answer is yes. The 3 laws are the only way in which rational human beings can deal with robots or with anything else. When I say that, I always remember, sadly, that human beings are not always rational. One of our problems may be more than the robot's problems. This robot is from what is the show called? It's called like Love, Sex, Death, and Robots, some combination of that. It's on Netflix. These like animated ones. This is a house cleaning robot, like a Roomba, that also, for some reason, has like rocket launchers and like machine guns and stuff in it for home self-defense, and goes crazy and tries to kill the person living in the house who thinks they're an intruder, right? It's like an over-designed robot. Your Roomba had too many weapons in it. How many of you are nice to your Roombas? Yeah, Roombas are weird. Yeah, maybe this is like a whole other thing we talk in the Q&A. But I'm really obsessed with humans who work for robots. Like when I clean my house so the Roomba can clean the house, like it makes me a little insane. Anytime I see a human working for a robot, but I think we all kind of do already. So I was looking for like real life examples where people had sort of taken the 3 laws and used them. And in 2010, 2011, the UK's Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council put out these very clearly non-binding principles of robotics, the first 3 of which are based on Asimov. But notice where they build in exceptions immediately, right? Robots are multi-use tools. Robots should not be designed solely or primarily to kill or harm humans. Great. Except in the interest of national security. So, right, yeah, those boos, those are good boos. We're fine with them as long as they're pointed outward, right? Humans, not robots, are responsible agents. I have so many quibbles with that sentence, but humans, not robots, are responsible agents. Robots should be designed and operated as far as practicable to comply with existing laws, fundamental rights and freedoms, including privacy. You see that as far as practicable in there, though? It might not be practical to take care of your privacy all the time, or to follow the laws, or your fundamental rights. When it's practical, you have fundamental rights from our robots. Robots are products. They should be designed using processes which assure their safety and security. Very interesting to me there. Robots are manufactured artifacts. They should not be designed in a deceptive way to exploit vulnerable users. Instead, their machine nature should be transparent. I think that's really interesting as well, right? We should hide robots. I'm also really curious, thinking about your presentation, about how making the robot like a cute little thing doesn't keep us from responding to it as if it is a human. We are still deceived by its weird non-humanity, right? And then the person with legal responsibility for a robot should be attributed. I'm really curious about it too. Like you'd always know whose robot this was. Like every little starship should say what kid ordered the Starbucks, right? That's just what it was. So really interesting. So I was thinking about that. Of course, I can't find any evidence of anyone in the UK using these to actually build robots, but they did have a think about it, which is nice. There's this quote that I go back to a lot that I think about when I'm thinking about the future constantly. I thought about a lot as we talked about AI. Wendell Berry, in his book, The Unsettling of America, said a man with a machine and inadequate culture is a pestilence. He shakes more than he can hold. I really love that. I really think a lot about how our technological advances are usually moving faster than our culture or our laws or regulations can. And obviously things like AI and large language models and that are moving very, very quickly to go into everything. And we're like scrambling to have laws, regulations, and culture around them. But obviously we have been living with these chatbots and robocalls and different robots for a long time. And some culture and laws are accruing to them, but we're still figuring it out. And I don't think we all know how we feel about it, how we want to feel about it. And I think it's a thing we should think about. This robot obviously is a military robot dog. I Googled, just like military robo dogs. We got to this Department of Defense page with this picture, and this was the alt text for it. Was airmen trained, I see no airmen, but airmen trained on the new Vision 60 robot dog at Mino Air Force Base, North Dakota, July 14, 2022. The robot dog is used to replace warfighters, workers, and military working dogs in certain situations to keep airmen safe. And maybe I'll just leave as a thought experiment, like how closely this robot can follow the laws of robotics, given its sort of design and mission brief. Could it follow the UK's ones? Could it follow Asimov's? I sort of know my answer to those questions, but I'll sort of, just sort of leave it in that space. Mostly, we are in the US, in the lives that most of us in the room are living, are interacting mostly with pretty innocuous robots. I mean, actually, great if a robot helps you with your urinary health. That's fantastic. But obviously, overseas at the border, other places, people are going to interact with other robots you make in other ways. And I think it's to all of our benefit to think about the kind of robots that our culture, our society is populating in the world and how we want them to behave those ways. Okay, thank you so much.
My face was showing during the talk. I ran everywhere. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Hi, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll open it up to questions pretty quickly. But I was wondering if you had, beyond the robots you design stuff, like a favorite robot interaction or a favorite robot you've seen in the world. Is there something you're like, whether it's good, bad, negative, positive, but that's my robot memory.
Ooh. Favorite robot. I mean, I remember being really fascinated by the ethical considerations that came up in the movie Her. I thought that was really cool. It made me think, and it intersected a lot with kind of some of the things that I think about in the field. I'm always paying attention to those good design moments, but they've just ran right out of my brain like a little stick.
Something you get asked a book and you can't see your books. You're like, there are no books. I never
Watch out your inbox. I'll now send you.
That's good. Yeah. I was thinking while you were talking about time I was in Seattle and I'd gone up a run really early in the morning and I got done and I just wanted a cup of coffee. And it was Seattle and I couldn't find an open coffee shop. I was just feeling frustrated. And I went to this place, I think it was called Jobot. Mm-hmm. And it had a coffee making barista robot. And I came in and I was like, oh, awesome. Can I get an Americano? It's the easiest drink to make. Mm-hmm. And there was a woman with the robot and the woman said, oh, Jobot's not working right now. And I'm like he's not working or it's broken? Well, it's broken. And she's like, and even if Jobot was unbroken and working, he would not be able to make your order yet because people have put online orders that aren't being made because Jobot is broken. And I was like, awesome. And she's like, and if he was free, you would have to put your order in on the iPad. So even though I know you want an Americano, you have to tell Jobot directly. And I was like, can you make me an Americano? And she's like, I don't make coffee. And I was like, can you fix robots? And she's like, no. And I was like, why are you here? And she's like, so no one hurts the robot. And I'm like, and you never want to demean anybody's job. All jobs are demeaning, right? And I was like, is your job to guard a non-functional barista robot? And she was like, Yeah. Bye. And I just think about that poor woman working for Showbot all the time. I know, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you go in there, don't tip Showbot, tip the lady, you know. I'm sure people have questions for Tara or things like to add in the conversation. If you have questions online, Liz is there and will raise her hand in the room, so we sort of know that you have them. So please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. Does anybody in the room have a question or sorry? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I am so glad you brought up the movie Her, because my question is kind of related to that. I've been thinking a lot recently about people who specifically end up developing some sort of like romantic or sexual relations like with a robot, especially because kind of in the post-pandemic world, there was TLDR, there was this whole app where people were in like basically married to these AI chatbots, and then they made an update to where like you couldn't romantically engage with them, and then all of the people who were like married to these robots expressed it like it was a kind of death, like they had lost a loved one.
Yeah.
And so thinking about that kind of in relation to like the laws of robotics, and even like if a robot would be able to reciprocate at all, or even like what that could look like, and kind of like specifically that kind of relationship with robots.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts about that.
Yes.
I feel bad for all those people. Yeah, I think I feel very scared by the ways that society as a whole generally tries to police love and say what's it's okay to love and what it's not. I feel this as a queer person, you know, and I observe it a lot in the world, and I think you know, there are perhaps more nuances of this that could be investigated. You know, I don't know exactly what's happening in those relational dynamics with the chatbots, but I feel like if the way that you love isn't hurting anybody and people are upset, it's probably threatening power. So yeah, I don't know. I was talking to Jenny about this, but there, you know, there was this woman who like fell in love with a bridge and married a bridge, and people were like, I'm like, who cares? Like, she's happy that she married a bridge, like, probably a lot better than your partner. Yeah, anyway.
We have crumbling infrastructure. Someone should love it and take care of it.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I feel like I have a very broad definition of what love is, and I think, yeah, people kind of define one way that it should be. But I also think about things too about, you know, like in meditation, when we try and practice love, it expands our capacity to love. So I feel like if you're loving these chatbots in a good way, I'm all for it, pro chatbot marriage. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add maybe is it immediately made me think of like, as someone who's been, you know, like a publishing writer for a long time, we're supposed to have platforms and be on social media and do all these things. And like, but this is true of like anybody who's been like a creative in the social media era, and you're going to make your money on Instagram Reels or on TikTok, or going to do this or that, and the platform changes, or, you know, that famous Facebook like pivot to video, then they unpivoted from video, and like things like that. Like you can't like stake your living on someone else's platform they control. And part of me wants to say the same thing about this with love, and so that also like love's always kind of like that, right? Like the conditions can change, and you have to grieve or deal with it. Like, you know, that person doesn't have. It's a really weird and specific problem, but I think. Yeah, it feels attached to a lot of existing problems in really interesting ways. There's also about Her. I watched that last year again, and I was also really struck by Joaquin Phoenix's job in that is working for that card company, but he works for the AI. It writes him, and he copy edits them. Like, you know what I mean? He also has a job where he's the copy editor for an AI that does things, which is now a job like tons of people have, where large language will make bad things and he fix them. And I was like, that felt weirdly the most interesting part of the movie for me, that his job was, to me, like demeaning in a way a lot of our jobs are being asked to be. Yeah, please.
So there's a movie that just came out, I think like either 2 years ago or last year, called The Creator.
Yeah.
And that was all about how in the West, they completely outlawed machines because of an incident that happened in LA. And the movie kind of expresses how like the machines themselves actually have more human interaction compared to the actual humans that they're fighting.
Yeah.
That are really trying to like go in. So I was like wondering about like what your opinions on like when it comes to like how when we try to demonize machines like to that extent, like are we even better than the machines themselves?
Yeah, I don't know if I totally know the answer to that, but it's interesting, right? It is interesting. I think we probably program most machines or bots or AIs, whatever we think of, to benefit ourselves. But then obviously the things you program to do could have wider implications, even the way they interact with each other, right? Like, I think there are also things about like AIs and chatbots, like just getting really into each other when to talk. You know, they don't want to talk to human beings. It's like the best input is for someone else who can think as fast. That's true as well, right? I think there was an interesting part of that movie they don't explore a lot. There are these like Buddhist monk robots, you know, that are sort of like, robots have religion and things like that. But I don't know. I don't know they have an answer about it, but it is interesting. Obviously, many of us live in / feel we live in a world in which humans are often terrible to each other, and it's mostly like the challenging part is being good to each other, you know. And so the morality tale in that movie makes sense that in some ways is like contrasting that way. I don't think it has to be that way, or obviously most media depictions of robots are like robots are coming to get us, or / we're coming to get them, and they're actually the good ones. But it's weird that it's always us versus them as opposed to some other more complicated relationship. Yeah. Please. Yeah, Kruger, go ahead.
Yeah. So you talked about earlier, how human language has these idioms like all out of batteries. I'm not wired that way. We were programmed to believe all this stuff, and that kind of denotes like a lack of responsibility, and like it kind of associates robots with like this is like a defined like physical thing that doesn't have responsibility over what it does. Like it's very definite. I was wondering, like, do you think that like having a lack of responsibility for a thing that is kind of person shaped, but not really like emotionally, psychologically, physically, but not like an actual person, do you think that plays a role in how people interact with robots, like not really feeling like responsible for their, the outcome of their interactions?
Very interesting. Wow, I'm loving this question. Yeah, I think my brain went in a bunch of different directions, so keep me in track of answering what you're talking about. I feel like I get what you're saying in terms of some of those like robomorphisms feeling a little bit like, well, I'm just wired this way. But I also feel like for me, as someone who's compared my own brain to a robot's in many indications, it brings me hope as well that kind of like programming can't be changed, and you can kind of like codify a behavior. Like if you keep repeating something that is, a kind pattern or a good pattern, you can kind of like reprogram yourself. So I think the words that I chose definitely lead in that direction, but I tend to talk about use robomorphisms when I'm trying to depersonalize someone. Like, oh, you've been programmed to believe this harmful belief about XYZ that I'm talking to someone about. And to make it feel less personal, but then to invite a different behavior, almost like overwriting that. And I found that generally helps me have conversations with people who may have more progressive beliefs about certain things. You know what my family looks like. Yeah, and then you were talking about accountability. Whose accountability are you talking about?
Like our accountability for like when we interact with like robots and like machines and artificial intelligence, like the fact that since they're not like a thing with legal rights, like the way that we can interact with them can be basically any way that we want, whether that's sentimental or cruel or any way.
Yeah, I do feel like I don't know if I have all the receipts for this, but I do feel afraid of that, kind of like in the way that it feels like it can ingrain harmful patterns because, though the machines are unfeeling, like I wonder what kind of things that we're practicing, if that's a mindset that we go into it with. I might noodle on that one a little more. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think I know the answer either. I mean, I think this is maybe always part of like the human robot stories are often stories also about how we treat people other than us, who we perceive as other as us. And the thing I always think of, like, how we treat robots is like how we already treat humans so badly, which is maybe too pessimistic. But I think like if we would only treat robots well if we gave them like literal like robot rights or something, like you wouldn't do it just because like, why are you breaking a thing, right? You know what I mean? Why do people treat animals badly? It doesn't have to be my people for me to not want to be awful to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I feel like the difference for me, because I was thinking about animals as well, is like with an animal, you can kind of see itself in
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
like you are lamb, you know?
Yeah,
And with the robot, you don't know who made it, what it stands to gain, what its purpose is. You don't know the wider system that it belongs to. And so I think that's also potentially like a liability for a manipulative machine to tap into our social wiring and try and get us to behave pro-socially to it. But we don't know who it's accountable to. We don't know where its brain lives. Like it's, yeah, I think it's scary to be treating these non-human things badly, but it's also, I think, it's correct to be suspicious of something that you don't know who made it and what they care about, and maybe it's not you.
yeah. I'm thinking about the iRobot robots in the Will Smith version, that they glow red when they're evil. Robots should just do that. When they turn on us, they should show us. Like that'll be really. Yeah, they should. Yeah, Liz, I'm back down.
We have an online question from Justin who says, I don't have a specific question per se, but would love to hear your overarching thoughts and feelings on poisoning AI training data via programs like Nightfall or Blaze. This is Liz adding, poisonings are really cool.
Yeah. Do you mean like we're like purposely trying to make the AI work badly?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as a Luddite talking to you on the internet, let's do it. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, right? I don't know. I'm always curious how much that will work. As you, like, I feel like this is not the same thing, but when I used to be on Twitter, every time an ad popped up, I put like, this ad is inappropriate, and I blocked the person who the ad was from. So no matter what it was for, I just don't like the advertised ad. So I just blocked every ad. The ads still keep coming. Like, I didn't like change the algorithm by doing that. But I don't know what it would take to like really, I just don't know how the mechanics of it work.
It's interesting, you know, and I'm all for, you know, messing up things
Me
that
too.
aren't working for us. But yeah, I would have a hard time understanding what the actual implications of that would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I will say, like, The Atlantic did a study when these large emails first got really popular that was about one of the training data sets, which were clearly like books that had been torrented off the internet, just pirated books. And there was a database what was in them, and 5 of my books are in that database. And I do like to think that all my bad, dumb ideas are like in the AI. And the weird crap I've written about and made up is like you ask someone like, how do bears work, and you get my weird sentient bears from one of my books or something, you know? So I hope that in my small way, I'm a little poison pill in the AI industry. That'd be great. And you got a question?
I think kind of along this line, but maybe within the ethics of what we're talking about, when talking about like the Asimov's rules versus like the UK rules, what do you think is the difference between a robot and a weapon, especially in the context of most technology is developed through military conquest?
Yeah, I guess I would be curious to dialogue with them because I feel like I'm curious where your point of view comes from on that. I mean, I think like working in the very tiny subset of healthcare, the way that I saw a bot potentially able to function in like a weaponized way would be like anything that underlines health disparities or health inequities. So I think something that you know, I noticed a lot of in the healthcare world was the tendency to like gender essentialize content, especially around like pelvic health. The tendency to kind of like code them as white as default and use like a white voice actress. And thinking about the ways in which like we relate more to programs that reflect our own identities, thinking about kind of like potential for widening health disparities, like looking at the ways that, you know, translation to Spanish got to be prioritized. So I don't know, in like my tiny world, I feel those were kind of some of the things that I was aware of. In the wider, like big R robot world, I feel a little bit baby. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I do either, although I'm, you know, thinking about that. Ideally, a robot is a tool, right? And a tool is good, but it's the old, like any tool is a weapon if you hold it right, kind of Ani DeFranco-ness of it, you know, which is good. But I think, so some of that, right? The thing can be used for anything. I know those robot dogs don't have to be used for hunting down America's enemies. There's probably something else they could do. I don't know what it would be. You know, I think that's purpose-built for a weapon is different than I think that is accidentally a weapon, right? And it's different than, you know, some of that what you're talking about is like ignorant misinformation as opposed to malicious. But you could design that chatbot to maliciously put out bad health information as well, you know, like.
Well, maliciously or
Yeah. Liz.
We have a kind of similar question, so I'll ask, so are robots teammates or are they tools?
Yeah. That's a big question, right? I mean, I think that in some ways that might be on the user of the design. I mean, right now it kind of feels like more tools than they're not partners, right?
I would say that, that's kind of like my mental model, but, I don't know, I feel like a lot of people's mental models could be different.
And different from people, the people who are dating AI chatbots have a different, that's not a, presumably not a tool if you're grieving its loss, you know? So I think you can have a relationship that is beyond that. Here, I'll come back to you.
Oh,
Hi.
I remember that I'm in a psychology honors sequence, and somebody was talking about that a research project they're doing is actually based around those chatbots where people have relationships with, those chatbots. And one thing that he was looking at was the relationship between seeking those agents out and loneliness.
Mhm.
And I remember we got into this whole conversation about like basically causation, because obviously we're looking at how this could be worked as a study. And we were listing out reasons why people might look towards these chatbots, and one of them was trauma or not feeling
absolutely.
satisfied with their current relationship. I didn't even mean to. But or just general depression or issues that they feel like they can't reach out to anybody else. And like I've seen, there is that idea of it's going to be less judgmental, so you can talk more and be more honest about issues that you're currently having. And I guess the way because obviously he wasn't looking at it in a harmful way, but I remember there were questions about how it could also, chatbots could lead to more loneliness and cause more problems. So I guess I guess my addition to it is there's that, when does it become maladaptive?
Right.
When does it become a problem that could be less beneficial and more harmful towards people like that?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great question and something to stay attuned to, as especially in the development of more like social robots. It feels kind of like social media, where it can be something that like can bring you closer to communities, especially, if you're really trying to seek out similar groups that may be harder to access in real life, or, kind of an affinity group, or, it can be something that just contributes to loneliness by kind of giving you a form of social interaction that doesn't actually match your needs. There's a lot of really good research though about like, because I think it's more in the popular discourse now. We've read the common read and taught it to our students. It's like, loneliness is a huge health epidemic on the scale of like cigarette something. I don't know. Why do we always compare things to cigarettes? But anyway, it's a huge health epidemic, especially amongst the elderly. And there's a lot of health interventions, like little digital seals and stuff that can talk to you, and like help social engagement for older adults. And there's some that are shown to improve well-being. And then I think, but yeah, I think it needs more study, because I think you're right. It can like really go either way, if not kind of like deployed correctly, either by the person designing the tool or by the way that the person sees the tool and kind of integrates it into their wider web and world.
It does seem also, I agree with all that. It seems also that, like you were talking about, like, not trying to police how people have relationships or how people love or all these different things. There might be lots of ways it can be positive that would seem negative to someone else. It does seem, this is just me really thinking as myself, not with any expertise whatsoever. Murray can find a not an expert in anything we talk about today. But it seems to me that the less, like the places where it's least like a person are the places where you get maladapted for behaviors with other people, right? Like if you're dating a robot, but it does whatever you tell it to, then that's a really bad thing to take away from dating that robot, right? Because obviously usually you date people who have self-will and have their own things, and should not just do whatever you want all the time. And so I think like there's like the edges are always the problem. It's not like a person who's lonely talks to a robot sounds great. Like, you know what I mean? It's the edge of it. That's the, okay.
Just to quickly add on before we go. It is interesting to think about, because I do see that part where it can be like the less human, where it can be more maladaptive, but I can also see it becoming so human that there is that forgetfulness that, oh yeah, this isn't.
Oh, yes, yeah.
This isn't a chat.
Yeah.
This isn't just a, like, somebody can think, oh, this is a, like, I guess like a blind spot, like
Mhm.
mentally. And I could see that turning into, I don't wanna like make a hard stance.
No, it's
but,
good. You're making a plot. You're making a
Yeah,
plot.
yeah.
You're a story. I like it.
Keep writing it down.
Because it can be positive, especially in some ways of maybe somebody who's not used to relationships
Yeah.
is starting to learn about like, oh, I get it now. I can see what love could be
Yeah.
like, and it's very sweet. But there's also that sense of you can become so obsessed with getting that love and getting that positive affirmation that you start forgetting to work or you start forgetting to sleep, and then it becomes really maladaptive. And obviously the bot is not going to realize, especially if it's a chatbot, that like you're not sleeping, you're not eating unless you tell it that.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's not going to tell you to stop, it's just going to keep doing
Yeah.
what you want it to.
I'm reminded of this short story by a writer, Zachary Doss, who I really loved. And I believe it's called My Robot Boyfriend or My Robot Ex-Boyfriend. But it's about a guy who upgrades his robot boyfriend, but, and the new robot is like really great, but like kind of too much boyfriend for him. And like, he's like having like a really hard time with his super perfect robot boyfriend. And the robot boyfriend eventually is like just, kind of like the worst he's ever did. He's got like the old boyfriend like in a closet or something. And he's like, gotta get rid of the new boyfriend so he can recharge the old one. It's like this whole, and his family's like, why don't you date real people? He's like, oh, no. But it's really funny. And it's like playing out really just like relationship dynamics in interesting ways. You had a question, then I'll go to Liz's. Oh, no, Liz, go ahead.
Awesome. One more question from online. Is there a gender difference in how robots are treated?
Oh.
Yes, has to be.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I think without any evidence whatsoever. Yes. I guarantee you the appearance of the robot and the sound of the robot matters entirely. Yeah, like we just bring the same biases to androids or something as we bring to people. I just don't believe that.
Yeah.
We're only going to be like racist and sexist to humans? Like, that seems- no, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, real quiet. I mean, I think there's a lot of different studies about like in voice interfaces, like what the ways that we will engage with like a female coded machine or like a male coded machine, and it is different and it does reflect the world. So that's not you forget. But that's a simple one.
That seems such a despairing place to end. We have time maybe for one more question. We'll try not to do that. Andrew, go ahead.
So a contradiction I have been experiencing a lot lately is that in a lot of stories that aren't like the Terminator ones,
Right.
but are stories where kind of robots have a humanity, the bad guy is usually the human being who denies, Commander Data's humanity or whatever.
Yeah.
We're like, we hate that guy, and yet that is like the position that I find myself taking regarding the actual AI products
Right.
in the world at the moment. I'm like, no, that is not a person. And it demeans me and everyone I know to make ChatGPT more like a person
Right.
in some ways, right? So thoughts, how do I untangle this? How do I not become the villain of the sci-fi story that we're living through? Or should I be?
One answer for me is like, your Star Trek example of Commander Data is like, Star Trek's so techno-utopian, right? And I think I'm not a techno-utopianist, at least in that way, like with enough technology, we'll fix everything. We don't have to, do anything else. We don't have to improve people, we just need to improve technology. So I think I feel like as a techno-utopianist vision in some ways, right? I don't know. I don't know yet. I mean, I'm also not a huge AI guy, so I don't know, but I don't confuse them with people at all either, right? Maybe even I'd say like the idea that like a chatbot could know everything and have it all, I think that makes them even more inhuman. I think like actually what we, I just speak for myself, I guess, like what we love about a lot of our friends and our partners and our children and all these different things, our pets, who are not humans either, but are closer than AI, is like their flaws and their foibles and the things that are different about them. Often the things we find attractive to people are their imperfections. Like a perfected robot that knows everything is like not, to me, like particularly lovable as an idea, So I don't know. I think that's maybe part of it, that isn't a person because of its like presumed superiority or perfection or infallibility.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, perhaps I would too be a villain in such a
Yeah,
movie because, I think it is, I think it is inappropriate to be kind of seeing like ChatGPT, for example, as something that like, okay, no, we can make it closer and closer to you. We can do this. Like, it can write our books for us. It can do our poetry. It can make our art for us. And it's like, being alive, I want to know what other humans think about being alive. Like there's, I think, tasks they can perform, there's tools that they can do, there's, ways in healthcare that seem to be extremely efficient. But like when I go to process the experience of being alive, I look to someone who is alive.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just add to that, 'cause I think that's actually a really positive way to end on the benefits of humanity. What robots could do for us, AI could do for us, is free us of the drudgery that whatever we define that as, that keeps us from living more human lives in that way, that keeps us from lives where we experience time with our family, we make more art, we play more sport, we do whatever we want to do. But that's not necessarily the aim of like OpenAI or something, right? Is to give us more time in our life to be more human. But I would support a future for robots that was that, and I think those would be robots I'd be happier to live alongside in every way. All right, you're great. Thank you so much. Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. We have 3 more events this semester. Our next one is going to be our distinguished Worldbuilding lecture, Talia Lakshmi Kalluri, for this great book, What We Fed to the Manticore, which is a book of short stories where all the protagonists are animals. And so it's really also talking about the non-human in a different way. I think about biopolitics. That will be in March, also online or in person. And we'll have 2 more workshops in April that we hope you will join us for. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you again at the Piper Center.